The night a violent storm tore through my town, I found a 4-month-old baby abandoned on my doorstep. My wife looked at him and whispered, "That child is bad luck. He will destroy this family." But I ignored her and raised that little boy as my own for 18 years. Then he left to build a future, and I never heard from him again. 22 years later, my own son turned against me and used the law to take my home. As deputies arrived with legal papers, a corporate helicopter landed outside, and a man stepped forward saying, "Dad, don't worry, I'm home. Thank you for choosing to spend this time with Revenge Dad. Now, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this? Drop your city or country below. You would be amazed how far this community reaches, and I read every single one. Some elements of this story are fictional, added to bring the message to life. Names and locations are not drawn from any specific person or place, but what this story teaches us is absolutely worth your time. The coffee had gone cold before I even took the first sip. I noticed it the way you notice small things on mornings, when something in your chest already knows what is coming before your mind does. I was sitting at the kitchen table on Sycamore Mill Road, both hands wrapped around the mug, watching the steam stop rising. Outside the window, the garden I had not touched in 3 years sat in the October light, dry and brown and patient in the way that only neglected things can be. I was 66 years old that morning. I had lived in this house for 31 years. I knew every sound it made, the way the second porch step groaned under weight, the way the kitchen pipes knocked twice before the hot water came through the way the front gate scraped the concrete when it swung open too fast. That morning, I heard the gate scrape, and I knew. Maggie Odom was standing on her side of the fence when I looked out. She had lived next door for 24 years, and in all that time, I had never once seen her stand at the fence with her arms crossed over her chest and her face doing what her face was doing right then. She was looking down the road then, back at my front door, then down the road again like a woman who wants to stop something and has already figured out she cannot. 2 cars turned onto Sycamore Mill Road. A black sedan, first moving slow and deliberate, followed by a county sheriff's cruiser with its lights off. They parked in front of my house with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this before and do not need to announce themselves. I set the mug down. My hands were steady. I remember being surprised by that. Brandon came through the front door without knocking. He had a key. I had given it to him 2 Christmases ago because he was my son, and I believed then that a son should have his father's key. He was 29 years old, wearing a pressed blue shirt, and he brought with him a man I had never met, Gerald Poole, according to the business card that appeared on my kitchen table a moment later. Attorney at law. Behind them came 4 sheriff's deputies spreading out across my kitchen and living room with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this before and have learned that filling a space is itself a form of pressure. One positioned himself near the front door. Another stood at the entrance to the hallway. The remaining 2 stayed close to Gerald Poole, arms at their sides, eyes moving across the room, the way trained eyes do, not looking at anything in particular and looking at everything at once. Evelyn came in last. She stood against the far wall of the kitchen, her arms at her sides, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my left shoulder. She did not look at my face. "Dad," Brandon said. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, and there was something in the way. He sat too straight, too prepared, that made my stomach drop. "I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening," I said. Gerald Poole opened a leather folder and laid a set of documents on the table. The pages were thick with legal language, the kind that is specifically designed to be difficult to argue with, because it is difficult to understand. "Mr. Hayes," Gerald Poole said in the flat, even tone of a man who has learned to keep his voice neutral when delivering things that are not neutral at all. "I represent your son, Brandon Hayes, in a petition filed with the Los Angeles Superior Court under California Probate Code Section 1800. The court has granted a temporary conservatorship of your estate effective as of last Monday. This morning, we are here to execute the terms of that order." I looked at the papers. I looked at Brandon. I looked at Evelyn, who was still studying that point above my shoulder, like it owed her something. "A conservatorship," I said. It means, Brandon said, and his voice cracked just slightly at the edges before he steadied it, that for right now, Dad, I will be managing your finances and your living arrangements. The court agreed that it's in your best interest. My best interest. I turned those words over in my mouth, and they tasted like something I had not been asked to order. There is also a placement order. Gerald Poole continued sliding a separate page across the table toward me. A residential care facility in Pasadena has been arranged. The staff there is excellent. Brandon has toured the facility personally. I stared at the page. I could hear Maggie outside, her voice carrying in fragments through the kitchen window as she spoke into her phone, calling number after number, her voice getting higher and tighter with each call that did not connect. Brandon leaned forward across the table, and for one moment his composure slipped, and I saw something underneath it that looked almost like pain, the pain of a man who has told himself so many times that what he is doing is right, that he no longer notices how much effort that telling requires. "Dad," he said, and his voice dropped low. "I know this is hard, but you have been forgetting things. You have been alone in this house, and it is not safe, and I am trying to take care of you. Just sign the placement agreement. Please, it will be easier if you just sign it." Gerald Poole produced a pen and held it out across the table. I looked at that pen for a long time. I thought about the last time I had held a pen at this table, once I had written out a document of my own, carefully with the names of the people I loved written into it in my own handwriting. I thought about one name in particular. I thought about the night I wrote that name down for the first time on a different piece of paper, smaller, folded in 4, pressed into the hand of an 18-year-old boy, standing at the end of this driveway with a suitcase that was too light for everything it was supposed to carry. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. My hand had been steady all morning, but now it was not. My fingers were trembling not from fear, but from the particular trembling that comes when every part of a person is fighting every other part. Then I set the pen down on the table. "No," I said. Brandon's jaw tightened. "Dad." "No." I said it again, the same word, the same voice, and I laid both hands flat on the table so they would stop shaking. "I am not signing that paper, Brandon." The kitchen went very still, except for Maggie's voice outside, which had become a low, desperate murmur, the sound of a woman running out of numbers to call. And then from somewhere to the south I heard it, the same sound I had heard that morning and had not yet understood. It was closer now, much closer. The window glass trembled slightly in its frame. Brandon spun toward it first. The deputy nearest the door stepped outside and looked up, and when he turned back, his face had lost every bit of the professional calm he had walked in with. "Sir," he said, "there is a helicopter coming down. Whitmore on the side. It is landing next door. To understand why I did not fight back that morning, you have to go back 22 years to a night when the sky itself seemed to be tearing open. November in Clover Ridge does not come gently. It comes with wind off the San Gabriel Mountains that rattles every loose thing on the property, and that particular November, it came with a storm that had been building for 3 days before it finally broke. I remember the sound of it against the roof, not rain exactly, more like the sky had decided to empty itself all at once and did not particularly care what was underneath. Evelyn had gone to bed early with a headache. Brandon was 7 years old and asleep down the hall, his nightlight throwing a thin orange stripe under his door. I was in the kitchen, finishing the last of a pot of coffee, watching the water run in, sheets down the window glass, when I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind finding a gap somewhere in the eaves. Then I thought it was a cat. We had a stray that came around sometimes, a gray tom that Evelyn did not want fed, and that I fed anyway when she was not looking. But it was not the wind, and it was not the cat. I opened the front door, and the storm came at me all at once, cold and loud and smelling of wet earth. On the porch just to the left of the door sat a plastic laundry basket. Inside the basket, wrapped in a flannel blanket that was already soaked through at the corners, was a baby boy. He could not have been more than 4 months old. His face was scrunched tight and red from crying, his small fists balled up against his chest, and when the light from the doorway fell across him, he opened his eyes and looked straight up at me, with the wide, unfocused gaze of someone who has been waiting a very long time, and is not entirely sure the wait is over. Tucked into the blanket near his chin was a piece of paper folded once. I picked it up with fingers that had gone clumsy in the cold. 3 words. That was all. Please take care of my son. No name, no phone number, no explanation for why a person would leave a child on a porch in a November storm and disappear into the dark as though they had never existed. I stood there in the open doorway with rain blowing sideways across the porch and a baby looking up at me, and I understood in a way that required no deliberation whatsoever that I was going to bring him inside. I carried him to the kitchen, shut the door against the storm with my foot, and began unwrapping the wet blanket. His skin was cold in the way that makes your own chest tighten in response. That animal alarm that says, "This is wrong, this should be fixed, fix it now." I found a dry dish towel, wrapped it around him, and held him against my chest while I looked for something warmer. That was when Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had heard the door. She stood there in her robe with her hair down and her eyes still squinted from sleep. And she looked at the bundle against my chest, and every feature of her face sharpened at once. "Walter," she said. "What is that? Someone left him on the porch." "Left him?" She said it the way you repeat something when you are hoping the repetition will reveal it to be something other than what it is. "On our porch, in a basket." There was a note. I showed her the paper. Evelyn read it. Her jaw tightened. She folded it in half and handed it back to me with the deliberate motion of a woman returning something she wants no part of. "Call the police," she said. "Call them right now, Walter, and have them come and take it to the proper people." "He," I said, "not it. Walter. He is cold, Evelyn. He has been out there in that rain, and he is cold, and I'm going to warm him up first, and then we will talk about what comes next." Her eyes went hard. She crossed her arms over her chest, and her voice dropped to the particular registers she used when she had already decided something and was simply waiting for me to catch up. "That child is not our responsibility," she said. "We do not know where it came from. We do not know what it carries. You bring a stranger's baby into this house, and you are opening a door. You will not be able to close again. And I am telling you right now, Walter Hayes, that child is bad luck. Mark my words. It will destroy this family." Down the hall, Brandon's door opened. He padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, blinking against the light, and stopped when he saw the bundle in my arms. He was 7 years old, with a 7-year-old's gift for reading the temperature of a room, and what he read made him press himself against the door frame and stare at the baby with an expression that was not curiosity and was not warmth, but was something more complicated than either. "Who is that?" Brandon asked. "We do not know yet," I said. "Is it staying?" Neither Evelyn nor I answered him. That was an answer of its own, and all 3 of us knew it. I turned away from Evelyn then. Not in anger because I was not angry. I turned away because there are decisions that announce themselves fully formed, that arrive not as choices but as recognitions. And arguing with a recognition is like arguing with the weather. I walked to the bedroom, laid the baby on the center of the bed, and began looking in the closet for the box of Brandon's old baby things that Evelyn had kept on the top shelf and that I had not touched in 7 years. My hands were shaking as I pulled the box down, not from cold, from something else entirely, some combination of the strangeness of the night and the weight of what I already understood was happening. I found a blanket, a soft yellow one that still smelled faintly of baby powder after all those years, and I wrapped him in it properly. He had stopped crying by then. He was watching me with those wide, dark eyes, and one of his hands had come free of the blanket, the fingers spread open, reaching for nothing in particular. I put my index finger into his palm. His fingers closed around it and held on. That was the moment. Not the note, not the storm, not Evelyn's warning, or Brandon's stare, or any of the 1,000 reasonable things a person might have thought about in that situation. It was that small grip, that blind instinctive refusal to let go, that decided everything. I looked down at his wrist and noticed something I had not seen in the dim light of the doorway. A thin silver bracelet, delicate as a thread, fitted so small it could only have been placed there recently and with intention. There was something engraved on it, I brought his wrist closer to the bedside lamp and squinted, but the letters were tiny, and the light was poor, and I could not make them out. I told myself I would look in the morning when the light was better. I did not know then that it would take 8 more years before I finally understood what those letters meant. I named him Ethan on the 3rd morning, not because I had made any grand decision about his future, not because the paperwork had been filed or the social worker had come, or Evelyn had changed her mind because none of those things had happened yet. I named him Ethan because on the 3rd morning he woke up before dawn and cried, and I came into the bedroom and picked him up and stood at the window with him, while the sky turned from black to gray to the particular pale gold of an early California morning, and it seemed wrong to keep calling him the baby when he was clearly already a person with opinions about the hour at which he preferred to be awake. "Ethan," I said out loud to see how it sounded. He stopped crying, looked up at me with those dark eyes. "All right then," I said. "Ethan it is." The months that followed were not easy, and I will not pretend they were. Ms. Sandra Webb from the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services came to the house 4 days after the storm. A woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a folder thick enough to suggest she had seen everything twice. She sat at my kitchen table and asked questions in a voice that was professionally kind, the kind of kindness that has learned not to get attached. "Mr. Hayes, are you aware that California law requires any person who takes in an abandoned child to report the matter to the county within 72 hours? I was not aware of that specific number," I said, "but I am reporting it now." She looked at me over her glasses. "You are reporting it on day 4. "Yes, ma'am." She wrote something down. Then she looked at Ethan, who was lying in the laundry basket I had lined with the yellow blanket, waving his fists at the ceiling with great concentration, and something in her expression shifted slightly the way a door shifts when someone on the other side leans against it. The process of formal adoption took 14 months. 14 months of home visits and background checks and court appearances and documents that required signatures in places I had to be shown twice. At the end of it, Ethan Hayes was legally my son in every way the state of California recognized, and I was legally his father, and that piece of paper felt both entirely necessary and entirely beside the point. Evelyn signed what needed to be signed. She never told me why. I never asked. There are negotiations in a marriage that take place entirely without words, and that was one of them. Those early years I worked more than I had ever worked in my life. I took on extra repair jobs on weekends. I drove 40 minutes to a machine shop in Pomona 3 nights a week to pick up overflow work. There were months when I was so tired by Friday evening that I sat down in the armchair after dinner and did not move until Saturday morning. But I was never too tired to pick Ethan up when he cried, and I was never too tired to read to him before bed, and I was never too tired for the particular joy of watching a child learn that the world is larger and more interesting than it appeared yesterday. Brandon was 15 by the time Ethan was old enough to be interesting company, and 15 is an age that has no patience for interesting company, that is also 8 years younger and gets attention for doing nothing more remarkable than existing. He was not cruel to Ethan. He simply acted as though Ethan were a piece of furniture that had appeared in the house without explanation, present unavoidable, and not worth addressing directly. Ethan, for his part, watched Brandon the way he watched everything carefully from a slight distance with those dark eyes that had been serious since the night I found him. By the time Ethan was 6, he had taken apart and reassembled my old transistor radio. By 7, he had taught himself the basics of coding from a library book with a cracked spine that he carried everywhere until the pages started coming loose. By 8, he was doing things with a borrowed laptop that I could not follow and did not entirely understand, but that made Mrs. Patricia Hale stop me in the parking lot of Clover Ridge Elementary one October afternoon, with an expression on her face like a woman who has found something unexpected and is not sure yet what to do with it. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and she was slightly out of breath, as though she had been waiting for this moment and had walked quickly to reach it. "I need to talk to you about Ethan." She was his 3rd grade teacher, a tall woman in her 50s with silver hair. She kept pinned back, and she had the particular energy of someone who has spent 30 years in classrooms and still finds children surprising. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "Something is very right," she said. "That is what I need to talk to you about." She had submitted Ethan's name to the Los Angeles County Gifted and High Ability Learner Program. The program required a complete background file, academic records, health history, and for children without full birth documentation, a personal effects inventory. It was routine, she explained. They needed to catalog any identifying items the child had arrived with. I brought in the yellow blanket, the folded note, and the silver bracelet. The bracelet came back 3 weeks later with a report from the county's identification office, a single page with a seal at the top and 2 lines of text that I read standing at the kitchen counter, still in my work clothes, grease still on my hands from the afternoon's last repair job. The engraving read, "WT for Ethan." WT, the report explained, matched the registered trademark of Whitmore Technologies, a privately held technology company based in San Francisco, California. The bracelet had been custom manufactured by a jeweler in Pacific Heights. Records indicated it had been commissioned by a Daniel Whitmore approximately 5 years prior for a child named Ethan. Daniel Whitmore. I read that name twice. Then I read the rest of the report, which explained that Daniel Whitmore and his wife Claire had died in a vehicle accident on Highway 1 in March of 2003, 8 months before the night of the storm. They had left behind an infant son whose whereabouts had been listed as unknown in the probate proceedings that followed. I set the paper down on the counter. My chest felt like something large and heavy had been placed on it from the outside. Ethan was in the living room. I could hear him talking to himself the way he did when he was working through a problem, a low, steady murmur of logic finding its way to a conclusion. He was 8 years old, and he had his mother's eyes. I did not know that, yet I had never seen a photograph of Claire Whitmore, but I know it now, and he was the rightful heir to a company I had never heard of. And he was doing his homework on my living room floor, and none of those things felt like they belonged in the same sentence. I was still standing at the counter, the report in my hand, when I heard the back door open. I looked up. Through the kitchen window, I could see Evelyn in the yard, her phone pressed to her ear, her back to the house. Her voice was low and careful, the voice of a woman choosing words the way you choose steps on uncertain ground. "Yes," she was saying. "The boy is still here. His name is Ethan Hayes now. He has the bracelet." A pause. Then, "I thought you should know." My hand tightened around the report until the paper creased. She had known. Before the school submitted the form, before the county sent the bracelet for identification, before I had driven home with grease on my hands and read 2 lines that changed the shape of everything Evelyn had already known, and she had already made a call, and she had not said a single word to me about any of it. I stood at that counter for a long time, the paper in my hand, the sound of Ethan's voice coming from the living room, steady and unhurried, working through whatever problem he had decided to solve that afternoon. The black car came on a Tuesday in October, 6 years after that night at the kitchen counter with the report still creased in my hand. 6 years during which I had not confronted Evelyn about the phone call I had heard through the window. I had thought about it many times. I had stood in the kitchen on ordinary evenings and looked at her across the dinner table and thought about it. But there are conversations that once started cannot be unstarted, and I had not yet found the version of that conversation that did not end with something breaking permanently. So I had waited. And now a black car was turning onto Sycamore Mill Road, moving with the slow deliberateness of a vehicle that is accustomed to arriving places where it is expected even when it has not been invited. Ethan was in the driveway when it pulled up, shooting free throws at the hoop I had bolted above the garage door 7 years ago. He was 14, all arms and legs, and he stopped shooting the moment the car appeared, the ball resting against his hip. His eyes tracking the vehicle with that careful measuring look he had carried since he was old enough to have a look. 2 men stepped out. The first was Richard Whitmore, a man in his late 50s with silver at his temples and a suit that cost more than my truck. The second was younger, carrying a leather briefcase with the posture of someone who was paid to carry things and to say nothing while carrying them. "Mr. Hayes," Richard Whitmore said, extending his hand to me at the gate. His grip was firm and brief. "My name is Richard Whitmore. I believe we have something important to discuss." We sat on the porch. Evelyn brought out a pitcher of water that nobody touched. She sat in the corner chair with her hands folded in her lap, and her face arranged into an expression of careful neutrality that had taken her years to perfect. Richard Whitmore spoke clearly, and without unnecessary softness, which I respected even as every word he said landed in my chest, like something dropped from a height. Daniel and Claire Whitmore had died on a Wednesday morning in March of 2003 on a curve of Highway 1 south of Carmel, where the guardrail had not been maintained and the overnight rain had made the road slick in a way that the morning sun had not yet had time to correct. Their son, 4 months old, had been in the care of a temporary nanny at the time of the accident. In the chaos of the weeks that followed, the child had passed through 2 different emergency placements before disappearing from the county's records entirely. The family had been searching for 8 years. "We believe Ethan is Daniel's son," Richard Whitmore said. He reached into the briefcase and produced a photograph, which he laid on the porch railing between us. A man in his 30s laughing at something off camera, dark eyes bright with whatever the joke had been. "The resemblance is difficult to argue with, and the bracelet confirms it beyond any reasonable question." My eyes went to Ethan, who was standing just inside the screen door. He had come up from the driveway at some point, without my noticing, drawn by the sound of his own name, and now he stood there with his hand flat against the screen, and his face doing something I had never seen it do before, cycling through expressions too fast to name, like a person trying on coats in a cold room, looking for one that fits. He was looking at the photograph. "One, Dad," he said. His voice cracked straight down the middle on that single word, and he pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, like he was trying to hold something in place. "Dad, that man has my eyes." My throat tightened so sharply it hurt. I looked at the photograph, then at Ethan, then back at the photograph, and the boy was right. The same dark eyes, the same slight downward pull at the outer corners that I had looked at across the breakfast table for 14 years without knowing where it came from. "Yes," I said, "he does." Richard Whitmore cleared his throat gently. "Ethan is the sole heir to Daniel and Claire's estate, which includes their controlling interest in Whitmore Technologies. There are legal steps involved, of course, but the family's position is clear. He belongs with us." That phrase, "he belongs with us." I felt Ethan's eyes move to my face, and I kept my expression very still, because what was happening behind it was not still at all. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out, and my hands gripped the arms of the porch chair hard enough that my knuckles ached. After Richard Whitmore and his lawyer had gone with a promise to return in 2 weeks with formal documentation, Maggie appeared at the fence. She had been gardening or pretending to garden, which was her way of being nearby, without being intrusive, and she looked at me over the fence with an expression that asked a question she was too careful to say out loud. I shook my head slightly. I did not have an answer yet. Then Ethan pushed open the screen door and came out onto the porch. He stood in front of me, and his eyes were red at the rims, and his jaw was set in the way it set when he was determined not to cry and was losing the fight. "Dad," he said, "does any of this change anything between you and me?" My chest ached so deeply I had to breathe through it before I could speak. I sat down on the porch step and patted the wood beside me. Ethan sat. We looked out at Sycamore Mill Road together at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon, going on without us neighbors walking dogs. A kid on a bicycle, the ordinary world entirely unaware of what had just landed on this porch. "Not one single thing," I said. Ethan nodded. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his wrist, the gesture of a boy who has decided that this moment does not get to beat him. Then he leaned his shoulder against mine, the way he had done since he was small enough to fit under my arm. And we sat there while the afternoon light moved across the yard, and neither one of us needed to say anything more than that. There are sentences a man says once in his life that he spends the rest of it turning over in his hands, wondering if the weight of them was worth what they cost. I said mine on a Tuesday morning in June of 2021 at the same kitchen table where Gerald Poole had laid his documents 4 years later under the same window that looked out onto the same garden I had not yet let go to ruin. Ethan was 18 years old. The Whitmore family had returned 3 weeks earlier with a formal offer, Stanford University in the fall, fully funded, followed by a structured transition into leadership at Whitmore Technologies in San Francisco. Everything laid out in a folder as thick as a dictionary, every page representing a door that I could not build for him, no matter how many extra shifts I worked or how many weekends I gave up. I had sat with that folder for 3 weeks. I had read it twice and then put it in the kitchen drawer, and then taken it out again and read it a third time. And on the Monday night before I called Ethan to the table, I sat alone in the kitchen until 2 in the morning with a cold cup of coffee and the folder open in front of me, and I made the only decision that I could live with, even though it was the one that was going to cost me the most. Ethan came to the table in the morning, in his work clothes. He had been helping me with a repair job in the garage, and he sat down across from me and looked at my face, and his own face went very careful and very still in the way it did when he already knew something difficult was coming and was bracing for it. "You want me to go," he said, not a question. "I want you to have what you deserve," I said. "Those are not always the same thing." His jaw tightened. His hands resting flat on the table curled slowly into fists. "I don't want their money, Dad. I don't want their company. I want—" He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. His eyes had gone bright and wet at the edges, and he was fighting it with everything he had. "I want to stay here. I want to keep working with you. I don't need any of that." "I know you don't need it," I said. "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" I reached across the table and put my hand over his fist. His knuckles were tight and cold under my palm. "And the point," I said, "is that I did not raise you to stay inside the borders of what I could give you. I raised you to go further than this place ever could. That head of yours, Ethan, I have watched what is in it since you were 6 years old, taking apart my radio. This county is not big enough for what is in that head. And if you stay here because of me, then 10 years from now, every time your life feels smaller than it should, you are going to look back at this morning. I would rather be the reason you went than the reason you stayed." Ethan's face crumpled. He turned his head sharply to the side, jaw working, and 2 tears ran down his face in quick succession that he wiped away immediately and furiously with the back of his hand, like he was angry at them for arriving. "You are not being fair," he said, his voice thick and uneven. "No," I agreed. "I am not." He pulled his hand out from under mine and stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen window and stood there with his back to me, shoulders shaking with the effort of holding himself together. I watched his reflection in the window glass, the set of his jaw, the way he pressed one hand flat against the wall above the sink, steadying himself, the way a man steadies himself against something that is bigger than he is. After a long moment, he turned around. His eyes were red, and his face was composed with the fierce, fragile composure of someone who has decided that this moment does not get to beat him. "Okay," he said. One word, flat and final, and the bravest thing I had ever heard. We spent the rest of that morning in the garage not working, just moving around each other in the familiar way of 2 people who have shared a space long enough that they no longer need to announce their movements. At some point, I found the small wooden box where I had kept the things from, the night of the storm, the flannel blanket, the note, the yellow blanket. I added one more thing, the piece of paper I had written his address on. I wrote it in pencil in my handwriting that had never been good and had gotten worse with age. 14 Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California. Then below it, in smaller letters just in case. I folded it in 4 and pressed it into his palm that afternoon when the car from the Whitmore family arrived at the gate. Ethan looked down at it. Then he reached into the front pocket of his work shirt and produced something I had not seen him carry in years. The silver bracelet coiled small in his palm. He pressed it into my hand. "Keep it for me," he said. until I come back for it." His voice broke on the last word, cracked clean in half, and he pulled me into a hug that was too tight and lasted longer than either of us had planned, his arms shaking against my back, his face pressed into my shoulder, and I held on because letting go was what I had decided to do, and I was going to need a moment before I did it. "I will come back," he said into my shoulder. "I promise, Dad, I promise." "I know," I said. "Go on now." He got into the car. He did not look back, and I was glad, because if he had looked back, I am not certain either of us would have survived it. The car rolled down Sycamore Mill Road and turned at the corner and was gone. I stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then I went into the kitchen. Ethan's coffee cup was still on the table, half full, gone cold. I stood there looking at it for a long time before I picked it up. From behind me near the kitchen window, I heard Evelyn exhale. A slow, quiet breath, the kind a person releases when they have been holding something for a very long time and have finally been allowed to put it down. I did not turn around. I carried Ethan's cup to the sink and poured out the cold coffee, and I told myself that the burning behind my eyes was from the morning light coming through the window. It was not from the morning light. The first letter came 3 weeks after he left. I know because I had been counting the mornings. Every day I walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, before I did anything else, before coffee, before checking on the garden, before any of the small rituals that hold a day together. I walked out in whatever I had slept in barefoot on the concrete in the early morning cold, and I opened the mailbox and looked inside with the particular hope of a person who is not yet ready to admit that hope might be running low. On the 22nd morning, there was a letter. The envelope was thin and slightly crooked, the way envelopes look when they have been addressed by someone who is more accustomed to typing than writing by hand. The return address said, Ethan Hayes, Mission District, San Francisco, California. I stood at the end of the driveway in my undershirt and read that return address 3 times before I went inside. I made coffee first, then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it carefully the way you open something you want to last. He wrote about the apartment, a single room above an Italian bakery on Valencia Street that smelled permanently of roasted garlic and fresh bread, and that he had decided he loved, because the smell meant someone was always working somewhere nearby, and that felt like company. He wrote about the city, about the way the fog came in off the bay in the evenings and made the streetlights look like something out of an old movie. He wrote about missing home in the specific way that surprised him, not the big things, but the small ones, the sound of the garage door, the particular creak of the second porch step, the way the kitchen smelled on Sunday mornings when I made biscuits. He wrote, I keep the piece of paper in my shirt pocket. Every morning when I get dressed, I make sure it is there. I do not know why that matters so much. It just does. I read that letter 4 times that day. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the wooden box with the blanket and the note and the bracelet and the linen cloth I had wrapped them in. The second letter came 5 weeks later, then a third, then a fourth. They arrived irregularly the way letters do when the person writing them is building a life and finding time between the building to report back on the construction. I noticed somewhere around the third letter that Brandon had taken to collecting the mail. It started casually the way Brandon did most things that were not casual at all. He would arrive on a Saturday morning, which he had begun doing more frequently since Ethan left, and he would say he was just passing by, and somewhere in the visit he would offer to grab the mail on his way in, because he had seen it in the box and it seemed like a small thing he could do. The first time I did not think anything of it. The second time I noticed but told myself I was reading too much into ordinary helpfulness. By the 4th time, I had decided not to say anything because I could not articulate a reason to object that did not make me sound like a suspicious and ungrateful father. So I'd let it continue, and the letters kept coming, or I believed they kept coming, because Brandon kept bringing in envelopes and setting them on the kitchen counter, bills and circulars and the occasional card from a neighbor, and I assumed Ethan's letters were among them, and I was simply missing them in the pile. It was Evelyn who told me the letters had stopped. She mentioned it one evening at dinner in the offhand tone of someone reporting the weather. I think Ethan may have settled in, she said, not looking up from her plate. Young people get busy. You cannot expect them to write forever. I looked at her across the table. She continued eating. Has he called? I asked. He called once, Brandon said from his end of the table. He had stayed for dinner, which he was doing more often now. I told him you were napping. He said he would try again. He shrugged. He must have forgotten. I called the number Ethan had left on his first letter that same evening. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, a generic recording, not even his voice. I left a message. He did not call back. I called again 2 weeks later. Brandon answered. He is in a meeting, Brandon said. I will let him know you called Dad. How did you answer his phone? I asked. A brief pause. He forwarded his calls to mine while he is traveling, for emergencies. You know how he is. I did not know how he was, which was precisely the problem, but I said, all right, and hung up and sat for a while in the armchair in the living room, with the television off, listening to the house. Then one afternoon I was looking for a pen in the kitchen drawer, the same drawer where I had once found Evelyn's documents years before, and my hand found an envelope instead. I pulled it out. The return address made my heart seize up, and then begin beating very fast. Ethan Hayes, San Francisco, California. The envelope had been opened. I reached inside, empty. The letter had been removed and was nowhere in the drawer and nowhere that I could find in the house, and I stood there with the empty envelope in my hand and felt something cold move through my chest that I did not have a name for. That same week, a letter arrived that Brandon set on the counter, along with the other mail, and this one was addressed to me in Ethan's name, but the handwriting was wrong. I had read 4 letters in Ethan's hand. I knew the way he formed his letters slightly forward, leaning the E in Ethan always a little larger than the rest, the tail of the Y dropping low. This handwriting was rounder, more careful, the handwriting of someone who was trying to copy a style rather than produce it naturally. The letter said that Ethan was grateful for everything that he had found his place in the world, now that he was moving forward, and hoped I was well, that it was probably best for both of them if they did not dwell on the past. I read it twice. My hands were trembling so badly by the second reading that the paper shook, and I had to set it down on the table and press my palms flat against the wood to make them stop. I told myself there was an explanation. People change their handwriting. People write differently when they are tired, or when they are writing quickly, or when they have been away long enough that small things begin to drift. I told myself that for a long time. I folded the letter and put it in the wooden box with the others. Then I went outside and stood in the garden that had started to go quiet at the edges, the far rows losing their shape, and I stood there until the light changed and my legs ached from standing, and I did not go back inside until I could trust my face to look like everything was fine. I will tell you now about something that happened 4 years after Ethan left, something I did not learn about until much later from the woman next door, who had watched every moment of it through her kitchen window and carried it alone ever since. Maggie told me on a Tuesday evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, she had stopped drinking, her hands wrapped around the mug, and her eyes fixed on the table between us. She told me she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, and it had never once come out the way she intended. Just say it, Maggie, I told her, so she did. Ethan came back in the spring of 2025. He drove down from San Francisco in a car Maggie did not recognize, a Honda sedan, dark blue with a small dent above the rear left wheel. He parked in front of the house at 10:15 on a Saturday morning and sat in the car for a long time before he got out. Maggie saw him through her kitchen window. She said she recognized him immediately even after 4 years, because he walked exactly the way he had always walked that particular way, of moving with his head slightly forward, like he was always arriving somewhere, just a few seconds before the rest of him. He had a box in his hands, brown cardboard tied with twine, not large. He stood at the gate for a moment, looking at the front door, and Maggie said that even from a distance she could see his chest rise and fall with a breath he was steeling himself to take. Brandon opened the door before Ethan reached the porch. Maggie said she did not know how Brandon knew to open the door at that exact moment, whether he had seen the car from a window, or whether it was simply the particular instinct of someone who has been watching for something they hoped would not arrive. Brandon stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door halfway closed behind him. She could not hear the words from her window. She saw Brandon's posture, straight closed arms crossing over his chest within the first 30 seconds. She saw Ethan's posture change in response the way a person's body changes when they are being told something that confirms the thing they feared most. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Ethan set the box down on the porch railing. Brandon did not touch it. Ethan looked at the front door once, just once, and Maggie said that look lasted no more than 2 seconds, but that she has never forgotten it because it was the look of someone doing the arithmetic on whether hope is still a reasonable position and arriving at an answer they did not want. Then Ethan picked the box back up and walked to his car. I have asked myself many times since then why he did not simply knock anyway, why he did not find another way. Ethan told me later that he had tried. He had called the house number twice from the car that morning. Both times Brandon answered and told him I was not available. He had looked up Maggie's name through the neighborhood directory and found no listing. He had found the church online, but had not known Pastor Linden's direct number. And the general line rang through to a voicemail that Sunday morning with no callback. He had 3 paths, and Brandon had closed every one of them before Ethan ever reached the porch. And for a long time, it troubled me, because it seemed like a thing that should have been simple. But I think I understand it now. Ethan was 4 months old when someone carried him to a stranger's porch in the middle of a November storm and left him there. He did not remember it. You do not remember the things that happened to you at 4 months old. But the body remembers what the mind cannot hold. And somewhere underneath everything he built and everything he learned and everything he became, there was a knowledge that had been his since before he had words for it. The knowledge that he could be put down, that he could be left, that the people who were supposed to stay sometimes did not. I gave him 18 years of evidence to the contrary. I hope it was enough. I believe it was enough most of the time. But Brandon knew exactly which door to push open. When the thing you fear most in the world is being unwanted, and the first person who ever chose you appears to confirm that fear, you do not reach for your phone and look for a second opinion. You do not write a letter to the neighbor. You already know what it would cost you to knock on that door and have it close in your face a second time. You already know you could not carry that. So you walk back to the car. You put the box on the seat beside you. And you drive away, not because you do not love the person inside the house, but because loving someone and believing they still love you back are 2 different things. And Brandon had just told him, in the specific language of a man who has been practicing the sentence, that the second thing was no longer true. He sat behind the wheel for another long moment. Maggie said she could see the outline of his shoulders through the windshield. And they were not moving the way shoulders move when a person is about to put a car in drive and leave. They were the shoulders of someone who has not yet finished deciding. The light in my bedroom was on. I was inside in the armchair by the window, reading, entirely unaware that my son was sitting 40 feet away in a dark blue Honda with a dent above the rear left wheel and a box of something he had driven 400 miles to bring me. Maggie almost called out to him. She told me that. She had opened her kitchen window and had his name in her mouth ready, and then she stopped. She stopped because she did not know what Brandon had said. She did not know what Ethan believed. She was afraid of pulling a thread she did not fully understand, and making something worse that she could not take back. She stood at her window, with his name still in her throat, and she watched his shoulders finally settle, the terrible small settling of a decision being made, and she did not call out. She has never forgiven herself for that hesitation. I told her she should. She told me she was working on it. Ethan's car pulled away from the curb, slowly, the way cars move when the person driving them is not entirely sure they want to go. It turned the corner at the end of Sycamore Mill Road and disappeared, and Maggie stood at her window for a long time, after looking at the empty street and the house that did not know what had just driven away from it. I sat with that information for a long time after Maggie finished telling me. My throat was tight and my chest hurt in the specific way it hurts when something has been true for a long time and you are only now being allowed to know it when the shape of a loss you thought you understood turns out to have been larger all along. "He came back," I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. the voice of a man who was saying something out loud for the first time, because saying it out loud is the only way to make it real. "He came back," Maggie said. Her eyes were wet, and she did not bother with them. Tears ran down her face, and she let them run, and her hands tightened around the mug of cold tea, and she looked at me with the expression of a woman who has been carrying a weight for a long time and is only now being allowed to set it down. "He came back, Walter. He just never made it through the door." While I was letting the garden go to weeds, Ethan was on the other side of the state, learning what it costs to build something from nothing. I know this now. I did not know it then. He told me later that he drove back to San Francisco that Saturday, with the box of gifts still on the passenger seat beside him. He could not bring himself to put it in the trunk. He drove 400 miles with it sitting there, and somewhere on the interstate north of Bakersfield, he pulled over at a rest stop and sat with his hands on the wheel and cried in the specific way that men cry when they are alone, and certain no one is watching, ugly and uncontrolled, the kind of crying that has been building for a long time and does not stop until it is finished. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand, pulled back onto the highway, and did not stop again until San Francisco. He had Whitmore Technologies on paper. The company was real, the inheritance was real, but the board of directors had installed an interim management team and made it abundantly clear that a 22-year-old with no track record would not be handed the keys to a multi-million-dollar company simply because his last name was on the founding documents. He would have to earn it. That was the word they used, earn. So he earned. He rented a single room in Mission District, took a part-time job doing IT support for a dental office on Market Street, and spent every other hour building a software platform for small business operations management. The first version crashed on the third day. The second version was better, but had no customers. He burned through his personal savings in 4 months and had to ask the Whitmore board for an advance against his inheritance, a conversation that cost him something he did not talk about directly, but that I could hear in the way he described it years later. The particular flatness in his voice that people use when they are recounting a humiliation they have decided to convert into fuel. He met Diane Colton at a startup pitch event in Soma on a Wednesday evening in October. Diane was 38, a corporate attorney with 15 years of experience and the kind of focused intelligence that made people in rooms instinctively lower their voices when she asked a question. She was the only person still in the room after the event ended, sitting with her legal pad covered in notes. And when Ethan came back to collect his forgotten jacket, she looked up at him and said, "Your pitch was the most interesting one tonight, and also the most poorly structured. Sit down, and I will tell you why." Ethan sat down. "Your product is not the problem," she said, tapping her legal pad with the end of her pen. "Your story is the problem. You are asking people to invest in software. You should be asking them to invest in the 10,000 small business owners who are going to save their companies because of it. Do you understand the difference?" "I think so," Ethan said. "Think faster," Diane said. "You have about 6 months of runway left if my math is right, and 6 months is not enough time to think slowly." She was right about the math. She became his attorney, then his advisor, then the person whose judgment he trusted above anyone else's in a professional context, not because she was always kind, but because she was always precise, and precision was what the situation required. The platform launched its second version in January. Marcus Tully, a 50-year-old owner of 3 hardware stores in Oakland, became the first paying customer after Ethan cold called him on a Tuesday afternoon and talked for 45 minutes without stopping. "Kid," Marcus said at the end of the call, "I have no idea if this thing works, but nobody has ever cared that much about my hardware stores before. I'm in." Growth was slow, then steady, then faster than either of them had projected. By the end of the year, Whitmore Innovation Group had 40 clients and 2 employees, besides Ethan and Diane. The board began paying attention in the way that boards pay attention when the numbers change direction. And through all of it, in the inside pocket of every jacket he owned, there was a piece of paper folded in 4. He opened it some nights the way another person might open a letter just to confirm it was still there, just to read the same 2 lines he had read 1,000 times before. 14. Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California. Just in case. He told me he never stopped intending to come back. He just kept waiting until he had something worthy to bring with him. He did not understand yet that the waiting was its own kind of cost, and that some debts grow larger the longer you carry them. I turned 66 last March. Maggie brought over a lemon cake with the frosting slightly uneven on one side, the way homemade frosting always is. And we sat on the porch and ate it with plastic forks because I could not find the good ones. And she talked about her sister in Fresno, and I talked about the fuel pump on my truck that had been making a sound I did not like, and it was the best birthday I had managed in years. Not because anything special happened, because nothing bad happened either, and at 66 you learn to count that as a victory. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Evelyn had her routines, and I had mine, and we moved through the same rooms, without much collision, two people who had been married long enough that silence between them had stopped being uncomfortable and had become simply the weather of the place. Brandon called on Sundays. He visited every few weeks always with a reason, a bill he wanted to look over. A repair he had noticed needed doing, a question about the truck. He was attentive in the way that made me feel on good days that I had raised a son who cared, and on less good days that I was being inventoried. I did not examine that feeling too closely. I had learned at 66 that some feelings are better left in the peripheral vision. The garden had gone quiet all the way to the fence line by then. I walked past it every morning and told myself I would get to it when the weather changed, when my knee stopped aching, when I had a reason to put in the work of growing something again. The reasons kept not arriving. Pastor Linden came by on a Wednesday afternoon in September, the way he did every few weeks with his ancient Ford pickup, and his habit of accepting whatever coffee was available without commenting on its quality. He was 70 years old and had been the pastor of Clover Ridge Community Church since before I moved to Sycamore Mill Road, and he had been at the house the night after the storm 22 years ago. The first person I had called after I found Ethan, and he had sat at this same kitchen table and said, "Walter, I think you just did something that is going to matter a great deal. I am not sure yet to whom." He sat across from me now and wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at me with the patient eyes of a man who has spent 50 years listening to people tell him things they cannot tell anyone else. "Any word from Ethan?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded. He did not push. That was one of the things I valued most about Pastor Linden. He understood that some silences are not gaps waiting to be filled, but weight that a person is carrying and has chosen to carry standing up. The newspaper had been on the kitchen table for 3 days before I got around to reading it. It was the Los Angeles Business Journal, which Maggie had left when she came by Tuesday, saying there was an article in it she thought might interest me without specifying which one. I found it on page 7, a profile piece half a page about the emerging technology sector in California and the companies reshaping it. Whitmore Innovation Group was mentioned in the 3rd paragraph, described as one of the fastest growing enterprise software firms in the state. There was a photograph. The man in the photograph was in his early 20s, dark jacket, standing in front of a window with the San Francisco skyline behind him. The caption read, "Ethan Hayes, Acting Chairman, Whitmore Innovation Group." I sat down very slowly in the kitchen chair. He had grown into his height. The boy who had been all arms and legs at 14 had become a man with a particular stillness about him, the stillness of someone who has learned that rooms will quiet down if he waits long enough. His eyes in the photograph were the same eyes they had always been, serious and watchful with that slight downward pull at the outer corners. I looked at that photograph for a long time, long enough that my coffee went cold again, which seemed to be what coffee did in this house when anything important was happening. I wanted to be certain before I let myself feel anything about it. I was not certain. The name matched, but names could match. The eyes matched, but I was 66 years old and looking at a small photograph in a newspaper, and I was afraid in a way that surprised me with its force of being wrong, of having spent 22 years carrying something that turned out to be a different person entirely. So I told myself I was not sure. I set the newspaper aside. That was when Brandon arrived. He came through the door with the easy familiarity of someone who has a key and has stopped thinking of it as a privilege, and he walked into the kitchen and his eyes went straight to the newspaper on the table, the way eyes go straight to the thing they have already been thinking about. He picked it up. He looked at the photograph. Something moved across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Not surprise, because it was not surprise, but the expression of a man recalculating. "Old news," he said, setting it back down. "That company has been around for a while." He folded the newspaper closed and tucked it under his arm. "Mind if I take this? I was going to look something up." "Go ahead," I said. He took it. The photograph went with it. I did not ask him to leave it. That evening, I opened the kitchen drawer and took out the wooden box. I lifted the lid and looked at what was inside the flannel blanket. The note, the yellow blanket, the silver bracelet, and the letter with the wrong handwriting. I looked at all of it for a long time, my hand resting on the edge of the box without touching anything. Then I heard Brandon's voice through the wall, low and fast the way he spoke when he was working something out that he did not want overheard. "Mom," he said, "we have a problem." I closed the lid of the box. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and looked at the closed lid and listened to the silence where Brandon's voice had been. And I thought about the man in the photograph with my son's eyes. And I thought about a piece of paper folded in four. And I wondered, not for the first time and not for the last, whether he still had it. If you are still with me on Revenge Dad right now, drop the number 22 in the comments. 22 years. Let me know you were here before this story takes a turn you will not see coming. Heads up, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Some details may not reflect any specific events. If that is not your kind of content, no hard feelings at all. You can step away right here. I have spent my whole life fixing broken things. Engines that knock and sputter, fences that lean after a hard winter, pipes that find new ways to fail every time the temperature drops. I was good at it because I learned early that broken things announce themselves. If you pay attention, they make sounds, they leave stains, they run hot or cold when they should not. The trick is knowing what you are listening for. What I did not know how to listen for was a plan. A quiet, patient, carefully constructed plan being assembled in the house I lived in, around the life I was living, by people I had trusted with my key. I learned the details later in pieces from Diane Colton's investigation and from Gerald Poole, who cooperated fully with the county once he understood the full shape of what he had been hired to execute. I am going to tell you what happened the way I eventually came to understand it, because I think you deserve to know how a thing like this is built. It started with the will. Brandon had found it in the kitchen drawer 6 weeks before I noticed the newspaper article. He had not been looking for it. Specifically, he had been looking for the insurance documents on the truck, which I had mentioned needing to update, and the will was in the same drawer underneath a folder of receipts in a plain envelope with my handwriting on the front. He opened it because it had my handwriting on it, and he told himself he had a right to know its contents. Maybe he did. I have thought about that. I still do not have an answer. What I know is that he read it and that he saw Ethan's name written in the section concerning distribution of assets, and that he drove home that afternoon and called his mother, and that the two of them sat in Evelyn's kitchen the following Saturday morning and made decisions that I was not present for and was not consulted about. The first decision was Dr. Kenneth Marsh. Marsh was 57 years old, a psychiatrist who had operated a private practice in Pasadena for 20 years before a series of financial difficulties. A bad investment, a malpractice settlement, a second mortgage that had become a third, had left him in a position where certain requests were harder to decline than they once might have been. Brandon found him through a referral from someone at his gym, which tells you something about the circles in which this kind of thing circulates. Brandon brought me to Marsh's office on a Thursday morning in June, under the premise of a general health checkup. "You have not seen a doctor in 2 years, Dad," he said, which was true. "I made you an appointment, just a checkup, nothing to worry about. I sat in a beige office with diplomas on the wall and answered questions for 40 minutes while a man with careful eyes and a yellow legal pad wrote things down. He asked me what year it was, who the current governor of California was, whether I had difficulty remembering recent events, whether I sometimes felt confused about where I was or what I was doing. I answered all of it correctly. I told him I felt fine. I told him my memory was as good as it had ever been, which was not saying everything was perfect, but was saying I was a 66-year-old man, not a man in crisis. Marsh wrote something on his legal pad and told me I had done very well and that he would send a report to my primary physician. What he sent instead was a psychiatric evaluation to the Los Angeles Superior Court, documenting what he described as early indicators of cognitive decline consistent with mild neurocognitive disorder. The evaluation was dated 3 weeks before the actual appointment. On the date printed at the top of that document, Kenneth Marsh's license to practice psychiatry in the state of California had been expired for 11 days. He backdated it. He wrote a report diagnosing a man he had spoken to once correctly answered every question put to him, and he backdated that report to a day when he was not legally permitted to produce it, and he submitted it to a court of law. The second piece was the power of attorney. A durable power of attorney is a legal document that authorizes one person to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of another. It requires the signature of the person granting that authority witnessed and notarized, and it is revocable at any time by the person who signed it. Evelyn signed my name. She had practiced it. Diane found the practice sheets later in a notebook in Evelyn's desk drawer. Pages of my signature written over and over in Evelyn's hand, the letters getting closer and closer to my own, until the difference was subtle enough to pass a quick examination. She submitted the document to a notary in Arcadia who processed 40 signatures a day and was not in the habit of comparing them against bank records. Brandon hired Gerald Poole, a real estate and probate attorney in Glendale, with a clean record and a tendency to ask fewer questions than his clients needed him to ask. Poole filed the conservatorship petition with the Los Angeles Superior Court in August, attaching the psychiatric evaluation and the power of attorney as supporting documentation. The petition cited my alleged cognitive decline and requested that Brandon be granted conservatorship of my estate, meaning full legal control of my finances, my property, and my living arrangements pending a formal hearing. The court granted a temporary order while it scheduled the hearing. This is standard procedure under California Probate Code. Section 1800 temporary conservatorships can be issued quickly when the petition presents sufficient documentation of urgent need. The court was not to blame. The court saw a psychiatric evaluation and a power of attorney and a concerned son and processed what was in front of it. That was when my bank account was frozen. I called Brandon and he told me it was a protection measure. I told him I did not need protecting. He told me the doctor had some concerns and that this was all just temporary and that everything would be sorted out very soon. His voice was steady and patient, the voice of a man who has rehearsed this conversation. I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen and tried to think of what I had forgotten recently. I could not think of anything. That did not comfort me the way it should have, because the most frightening part of being told your mind is failing is that you immediately begin to doubt the very instrument you are using to evaluate the claim. I went to the wooden box that evening. I opened it. I looked at Ethan's name written in the will I kept underneath the flannel blanket. Then I closed the box and sat in the dark kitchen and listened to the house breathe around me, and I thought about how a man can spend 66 years learning to read the sounds of broken things and still not hear the one that matters most until it is almost too late. There is a kind of loneliness that does not come from being without people. It comes from being surrounded by people who have stopped seeing you, people who look at your face and see, instead, a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained, a signature on a document that has not yet been obtained. I had lived inside that loneliness for years without having a name for it. That September, it acquired a shape I could finally put my hands on. The first thing I noticed was the bank. I drove to the branch on Foothill Boulevard on a Tuesday morning to withdraw $200 for a new carburetor. I needed for the truck, and the young woman behind the counter looked at her screen with an expression that people practice specifically to avoid showing what they are actually thinking, and told me that my account was currently under a restricted access order and that she was not able to process withdrawals at this time. Restricted, I said. Yes, sir. She kept her eyes on the screen. You would need to contact the authorized representative on the account. I am the account holder, I said. I have been the account holder for 31 years. She looked at me then, and I could see that she was genuinely sorry, which was somehow worse than if she had not been. I understand, Mr. Hayes, but the court order supersedes standard access. I am not able to override it. I drove home with the $200 I did not have and the carburetor I could not buy and sat in the driveway for a while before I went inside. I called Brandon. It is just temporary, Dad, he said, and his voice had that careful practice steadiness that I had started to recognize the way you recognize a sound an engine makes when something is wrong with it. It is a protection measure while the court reviews things. Nothing to worry about. I will take care of the bills in the meantime. I do not need my bills taken care of, I said. I need access to my own money. I know, Dad. I hear you. It will be sorted out soon. He hung up before I could ask him what soon meant. Over the following 2 weeks, I began to see the architecture of it. The electric bill, which I had paid myself for 31 years, was now being sent to Brandon's address. The property tax notice that arrived in October was addressed to Brandon Hayes' care of this property. When I called the county assessor's office to ask why, I was told that a change of correspondence address had been filed by the authorized conservator in August. I was the property. Brandon was the conservator. These were apparently facts that had been established without my participation. Maggie noticed before I said anything to her. She appeared at my back door on a Wednesday afternoon with a container of vegetable soup and the expression of a woman who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. Walter, she said, setting the soup on the counter and turning to face me. How long has Brandon been taking your mail? I looked at her. I have been watching, she said. Not snooping. Watching. There is a difference, and I want you to know I know the difference. She pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down in it with the decisiveness of a woman who has made up her mind about something. He gets here before 8 some mornings. He takes whatever is in the box and leaves. I have seen him do it 9 times in the past month. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with the particular pain of having your own slowness confirmed by someone else's quickness. I thought he was helping, I said. I know you did, Maggie said. You always think people are helping Walter. It is one of your best qualities, and it has cost you a great deal over the years. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and her hand was warm and dry and steady in the way that hands are when they belong to someone who has decided to stop standing to the side. I went to see Pastor Linden yesterday, she said. I told him what I have been seeing. He wants to come by. Pastor Linden came the next morning. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee mug and his patient eyes, and he asked me directly without preamble whether I knew what a conservatorship was. I told him I did not. He explained it slowly and clearly, the way he preached without condescension and without softening it beyond recognition. A conservatorship, he said, was legal arrangement in which a court appointed someone to manage the finances and personal decisions of a person deemed unable to manage them independently. It required a psychiatric evaluation and supporting documentation. It could be granted temporarily while the court reviewed the full petition. Brandon filed one, Pastor Linden said. In August, the court granted the temporary order. I sat with that for a moment. My hands were flat on the table, and I looked at them the way you look at things when you need something solid to focus on. Can I fight it? I asked. Yes, he said, but you need an attorney, an independent one, not anyone Brandon has access to. He leaned forward slightly. I tried to reach the legal aid office in Los Angeles last week, Walter. Their intake list is currently closed. They are not accepting new clients until January. I also contacted 2 private attorneys in Pasadena. One did not return my call. The other said she could not take the case before November at the earliest. He did not say the next part out loud, but I heard it anyway. November might be too late. There is something else, Pastor Linden said. He looked uncomfortable in the way that good men look uncomfortable when they have to say something they wish were not true. I believe Brandon has been intercepting more than the mail. Mrs. Henderson at the church told me she tried to call you 3 weeks ago about the harvest supper and could not get through. She said a man answered and told her you were resting and not to be disturbed. I looked at the telephone on the kitchen wall, the same telephone I had used for 15 years. He answered my phone, I said. I believe so, Pastor Linden said. The three of us sat at that kitchen table while the October light moved across the floor, and I felt the particular sensation of a man who has been standing in a room that has been slowly filling with water and has only just looked down. Maggie stood up to leave an hour later. She stopped at the kitchen door and turned back, and her face was doing something careful and decided. "Walter," she said, "I have something I need to show you. I have been keeping it for a long time." Her voice caught at the edges just slightly the way voices catch when they are carrying something heavy. "I am sorry it took me this long to bring it. I will come back tonight." She left before I could ask her what it was. I sat at the kitchen table after they were both gone and looked at the telephone and looked at the mail slot in the front door and looked at my own hands, and I thought about water rising slowly in a room while a man stands in it reading a book. And I thought about all the mornings I had walked to that mailbox before coffee barefoot on the cold concrete counting the days since Ethan had left. And I wondered for the first time with real urgency whether any of those days had been what I thought they were. Maggie came back at 7 in the evening carrying a shoebox, not a gift box, a worn shoebox with a rubber band holding the lid down and the corners soft from years of being handled and set down and picked up again. The kind of box a person uses when they are keeping something they were not entirely sure they had the right to keep. She set it on the kitchen table and sat down across from me and did not take off her coat as though she was not sure yet whether this visit was going to go the way she hoped. "I need to tell you something before I open this," she said. Her hands were pressed flat on top of the box and her chin was up the posture of a woman steeling herself. "I want you to hear the whole thing before you say anything. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. She took a breath that was slightly unsteady at the top. "For about 10 years," she said, "I watched Evelyn take things out of the mailbox and throw them in the trash can at the end of the driveway. Not every day, but often enough that I noticed. Bills, sometimes I thought. Circulars. I told myself it was none of my business how a woman sorted her own household mail." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "But some of those envelopes had a San Francisco return address on them. I could see it from my driveway when I was getting my own mail. And after a while I started to think, what if? What if they were not circulars? What if they were something else?" She looked at her hands on the box. "So I started picking them up. After the trash had been put out, before the truck came, I told myself I would look at them, and if they were nothing, I would throw them back and nobody would ever know." Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly, and she pressed her lips together for a moment. "They were not nothing," she said. She lifted the rubber band off the box and took the lid off and turned it around so I could see inside. 23 envelopes, stacked in order the way a careful person stacks things. Every one of them had a San Francisco return address. Every one of them had my name on the front, in handwriting I had not seen in 4 years, but recognized the way you recognize a voice on the phone before the person says who they are. My hands moved toward the box before I had decided to move them. I picked up the top envelope and held it, and my chest was doing something that I did not have a clean word for, something between breaking and opening, the two of which are not as different as people think. "He never stopped writing," Maggie said. Her eyes were wet, and she was not bothering to hide it. "Walter, he never stopped, not once." I opened the first envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages handwritten on lined paper, the ink slightly faded from years inside the box. The date at the top said 3 weeks after Ethan had driven away from Sycamore Mill Road, with a suitcase too light for everything it was supposed to carry. He wrote about the apartment above the restaurant on Valencia Street. He wrote about the fog coming in off the bay in the evenings, and how it reminded him of early mornings on Sycamore Mill Road, when the marine layer came in low and everything smelled like damp concrete and eucalyptus. He wrote about a man named Marcus, who laughed too loud at his own jokes and could not cook beans to save his life. He wrote about missing the sound of the garage door and the specific creak of the second porch step. And then near the bottom of the second page, in handwriting that had gotten slightly smaller, as though he was trying to fit something large into a small space, he wrote, "The paper you gave me is with me everywhere I go. I take it out sometimes when things are hard, and I read it and I think about coming home. I am not ready yet. But I want you to know that I think about it every single day. I think about you every single day, Dad. I just wanted you to know that. I could not read any further." My throat had closed up completely, and my eyes were burning, and my hands were shaking so badly that the pages rattled against each other, and I had to set the letter down on the table and press both palms flat against the wood and breathe through it the way you breathe through physical pain, slow and deliberate, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Maggie reached across the table and covered my hands with both of hers. "I am so sorry," she said, and her voice was thick and unsteady. "Walter, I am so sorry I waited this long. I kept telling myself it was not my place. I kept telling myself you would find out some other way. I should have come sooner. I should have come years ago. Maggie." My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped clean by everything that was happening behind it. "You came. That is what matters. You came." She nodded. Her tears ran freely down her face, and she let them. I looked at the stack of envelopes in the shoebox. 23 letters. 4 years of writing that had gone into a trash can at the end of a driveway and been rescued by a woman in her 60s who had told herself it was none of her business and then decided it was. "The last letter I received," I said. "The one with the wrong handwriting." Maggie nodded slowly. "I know. I saw Evelyn put that one in the outgoing mail herself." I picked up the letter again. I read the last line one more time. "I think about you every single day, Dad." Outside the kitchen window, the garden was dark. The rose I had stopped tending 3 years ago, the soil gone hard and gray. And for the first time since I had let it go, I felt something shift in my chest about that garden. Not guilt exactly, but something closer to intention. The particular feeling of a person who has just remembered why something was worth doing in the first place. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with Maggie's shoebox open in front of me, and I read all 23 letters before the window turned gray. Some of them I read twice. The handwriting changed across the years, tighter when he was tired, looser when something had gone well. Once in the middle of the stack, a letter written in pencil instead of pen, which told me he had written it somewhere without a desk, maybe a car, maybe a break room, wherever a person finds themselves when the need to write something down outpaces the availability of proper tools. Every letter had my name at the top. Every letter ended the same way. "Your son Ethan, your son." By the time the kitchen window went from black to gray to the pale, flat light of an October morning, my eyes were burning and my back ached from the chair, and I had a clarity that only comes from a night of not sleeping, the kind of clarity that strips everything down to what is actually true and leaves the rest on the floor. What was true was this. My son had written to me for 4 years. My son had come back once and been turned away at the door while I sat 40 feet away reading a book. My son had never forgotten me. And today, it was already today the people who had arranged all of that silence were coming to take my house. I made coffee, I sat with it and watched the morning come. Brandon arrived at 8:15 earlier than I expected. He had the key in the lock before I heard the car, and he came through the door with Gerald Poole behind him and 4 sheriff's deputies behind Gerald Poole spreading out through my kitchen and living room, the same way they had the first time, filling corners and doorways with the organized forward momentum of something that has been planned and rehearsed and is now simply being executed. Evelyn came in last. She stood in the corner of the kitchen with her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes on the middle distance the way she had stood 22 years ago on the night of the storm when I had brought Ethan in from the rain. The same posture, the same refusal to look at my face directly. Some things I thought do not change very much. Gerald Poole laid the documents on the table. He explained the placement order in the same flat, careful voice he had used the first time, the voice of a man who has decided that professional neutrality is the same thing as innocence. Brandon sat down across from me. His blue shirt was pressed. His hands were steady on the table. He looked like a man who has told himself so many times that what he is doing is right, that the telling has become indistinguishable from believing. "Dad," he said, "I need you to sign the placement agreement, today." "I know you do," I said. "This does not have to be difficult." "It is already difficult, Brandon." I looked at him across the table. This man I had raised, this boy I had taught to ride a bicycle on this very driveway, and I felt the particular grief of recognizing a stranger inside a familiar face. "It has been difficult for a long time. We have just been pretending otherwise." His jaw tightened. He pushed the documents across the table toward me. Gerald Poole produced a pen and set it beside them. I looked at the pen. I thought about the 23 letters in the shoebox on the counter behind me. I thought about a piece of paper folded in 4 in the pocket of a jacket 400 miles north of here. I thought about a boy who had come back once and been told to go away by a man sitting in this room. "No," I said. Brandon's composure cracked at the edges, just slightly, like a wall that has been under pressure for too long. "Dad, the court has already—" "I heard you the first time," I said. "The answer is still no." He stood up from the table. His chair scraped the floor. "You do not have a choice here. That is what a court order means. It means you do not have a choice." "I understand what it means," I said. "I am still saying no." One of the deputies shifted his weight near the door. Gerald Poole looked at his documents. Evelyn looked at the wall. Outside through the kitchen window, I could see Maggie at her fence with her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand moving through the air. The way hands move when every number you call goes unanswered and the urgency keeps climbing anyway. Brandon put his hands flat on the table and leaned forward and looked at me with the eyes of a man who has run out of patience and is about to trade it in for something less careful. "Dad." And then the sound came from the south, low and rhythmic and growing, the way it had grown yesterday morning when I first heard it and had not known what to make of it. Except now it was closer, much closer, close enough that the window glass trembled slightly in its frame, and the papers on the table lifted at their corners, and the deputy nearest the door stepped outside onto the porch and looked up, and then turned back with an expression I had not seen on a man in uniform before. "Sir," he said, and his voice had lost its professional flatness entirely. "It is on the ground. Someone is getting out." Brandon spun toward the window. His face went the color of old concrete. Evelyn's arms dropped from her chest to her sides. I did not move. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, and I looked at the shoebox on the counter, and I thought about a boy who had promised he would come back. And I thought maybe he kept it after all. While I was sitting at that kitchen table with a pen, I refused to pick up. Something was happening 40 miles south that I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for. Ethan told me about it later in pieces, the way he told me most things, not all at once, but in the order he could manage them. I am going to tell it to you the way I eventually came to understand it, because I think it belongs in this story as much as anything that happened on Sycamore Mill Road. The conference room on the 28th floor of the Whitmore Innovation Group building on Wilshire Boulevard had 14 people in it that Monday morning. Ethan was at the head of the table, which was a long glass table that reflected the Los Angeles skyline in a way that made everything look very clean and very far from a driveway on the edge of Clover Ridge. The agenda was the proposed acquisition of Meridian Capital LLC, a financial management company based in Culver City that had been under informal review for 6 weeks. Meridian managed fiduciary services for a client base that overlapped directly with Whitmore's small business platform. Users, the acquisition had been framed as a natural expansion of services, a way to offer Whitmore's clients integrated financial management alongside their existing operations software. Meridian was not a large company. It was a company that had built a specific and profitable business out of filing conservatorship petitions on behalf of clients at the Los Angeles Superior Court, petitions that, upon closer examination by Diane Colton's team, had begun to show a pattern of procedural irregularities, consistent enough to suggest they were not accidents. Diane was standing at the front of the room, her reading glasses on her legal pad covered in the small, precise handwriting that Ethan had told me she used when she was working through something she had not yet fully resolved. She was on page 34 of the due diligence report. "The Meridian file has one category of concern I want to flag before we go further," she said, in the tone she used when something was not a suggestion, but a directive dressed in polite clothing. "Their court filing history includes several conservatorship petitions currently in active enforcement status. Our team has identified irregularities in the supporting documentation across at least 6 of them. If we complete this acquisition, while those filings are active, the legal liability transfers to Whitmore." "How significant is the exposure?" someone at the table asked. "Significant enough that I would not recommend closing until the active cases are resolved or the flawed filings are withdrawn," Diane said. She turned to the next page of her report. "I am going to read the active case list so the board is aware of what we are talking about specifically." She read 4 names, then she read a 5th. "Walter Hayes, 14 Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California. Conservatorship petition filed by Brandon Hayes. Temporary order granted September 19th. Enforcement action scheduled for this morning." Ethan was signing a separate document at the far end of the table. He had a pen in his hand and his eyes on the page in front of him, and he was in the middle of writing his name when Diane said 14 Sycamore Mill Road. His pen stopped. Diane looked up from the report. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has changed and no one is entirely sure what it is yet. "Ethan," she said, not Mr. Hayes, which was what she called him in meetings. "Ethan, look at this." He set the pen down on the table. The ink had run from the nib, sitting still against the paper, spreading into a small dark circle on the signature line of a document worth considerably more than the house on Sycamore Mill Road. He did not appear to notice. He stood up. He walked to the window that overlooked Wilshire Boulevard, and he stood there for a moment, with his back to the room, and the 14 people at the table watched him and did not speak, because something in the set of his shoulders told them very clearly that speaking was not what the moment required. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed a piece of paper that had been folded in 4 for so long that the creases had worn white and the paper itself had gone soft at the edges. The softness of something that has been handled 10,000 times by hands that needed to confirm it was still there. He unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold something you are afraid of tearing. He laid it on the conference table beside Diane's open report. He put his finger on the address printed in the report and then on the address written in pencil on the piece of paper, in handwriting that was not his, in letters that had been written by a man with grease still on his hands on a June afternoon 4 years ago. 14 Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California, just in case. 2 addresses, 1 piece of paper, 22 years. The pen was still on the table with the ink blooming slowly outward from the point where it had stopped. Diane did not need to be told. She was already on her phone speaking quickly and quietly to the firm's emergency litigation contact at the Los Angeles Superior Court, dictating the grounds for an emergency motion to stay the enforcement action currently in progress at the above address. Under California Code of Civil Procedure, an emergency motion to stay could be filed and considered on the same day when an immediate and irreparable harm could be demonstrated. Fraudulent documentation supporting a conservatorship order qualified. The flawed psychiatric evaluation qualified. The forged power of attorney qualified. She filed before Ethan reached the door. He stopped at the door and turned back to the room. 14 people looked at him. The Los Angeles skyline sat behind the glass, clean and far away. "Cancel everything on today's calendar," he said. His voice was steady in the particular way that voices are steady, when the person speaking them has made a decision so complete that there is no room left in them for anything else. "Call the heliport. Diane, bring the full Meridian file. You are coming with me." Someone on the board said the acquisition still had open points. Ethan looked at that person for one moment. "There is a 22-year-old debt that comes due this morning," he said. "Everything else will wait." He walked out of the room. Diane picked up her files and followed him without a word, which was how you knew if you knew Diane Colton at all that she believed every word he had just said. I heard it before I saw it. Everyone in that kitchen heard it. The sound came from the south, low and rhythmic and growing. Not the way thunder grows by spreading outward, but the way it grows when it has decided on a specific destination and is descending toward it with complete intention. Brandon moved to the window first, then Gerald Poole. Then one of the deputies stepped out onto the porch and shaded his eyes against the morning sun and looked up, and the expression on his face when he turned back was the expression of a man who has just realized that the situation he is standing in is considerably larger than the paperwork suggested. The helicopter came in low over the tree line on the south side of Sycamore Mill Road. It was not a small machine. It was the kind of aircraft that corporations use when they need to move people quickly and want everyone who sees it to understand that the people being moved are not unimportant. On its side, in clean white letters against a dark body, was the name Whitmore. It cleared the fence line and descended into the open lot to the west of the property. The vacant parcel that old Mr. Hendricks had left unmowed for 30 years, and that had consequently become the widest flat space on this end of Sycamore Mill Road. The rotor wash came through the kitchen window like a physical thing, scattering the papers on the table, rattling the cups on their hooks, lifting the corners of the placement agreement that I had refused to sign, and sending it skidding off the table onto the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. The engine wound down. The blades slowed their beating. A silence came down over the yard that felt different from the silence before, heavier and more deliberate. The silence of something that has arrived and is waiting for what comes next. The cabin door opened. The man who stepped out was in his early 20s, dark jacket, no tie, moving with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned that rushing communicates uncertainty. Behind him came a woman with blonde hair and a thick file case under her arm, walking in the rapid, focused way of someone who already knows exactly what needs to be done and is impatient to begin doing it. The man stopped at the edge of the yard. His eyes moved across the scene in front of him, slowly and completely, the way eyes move when they're trying to take inventory of a situation before committing to a response. He looked at the 4 sheriff's vehicles parked along the road and the driveway. He looked at the deputies positioned around the yard. He looked at Gerald Poole. He looked at Brandon, who had gone the color of concrete and was gripping the porch railing with both hands. He looked at Evelyn, who had pressed herself back against the kitchen wall. Then his eyes found me. I was standing on the porch steps. I had come out when the helicopter landed, because there are moments when staying inside feels like a failure of some kind, like refusing to witness something that has come specifically to be witnessed. I was standing on the second step, the one that had creaked under weight for 15 years, and I was looking at this man. I did not recognize this stranger in a dark jacket crossing my yard with 22 years of distance between us. He walked past Brandon without acknowledging him. He walked past Gerald Poole the same way. He came across the yard, and he stopped at the base of the porch steps. And he looked up at me, and I looked down at him. And I was searching his face for something I knew, and finding pieces of it, and not being able to assemble them into certainty. And then he went down on one knee on the bottom step. And he said it. "Dad, don't worry, I'm home." 3 words. That was all. I stood on that porch step and felt 22 years arrive in my chest all at once. Not gradually, not in pieces, but all at once, the full weight of every morning I had walked to the mailbox, and every evening I had passed the closed door of his room, And every time I had looked at that shoebox of letters, and every night I had told myself that he had moved on, and that was all right, because I had raised him to move on. 22 years. I could not speak. I could not move. I stood there with my hands at my sides and my throat locked, and I looked at his face, this face I did not know, and I searched it, and then I found the thing I was looking for, not in the jaw or the forehead or the set of the mouth, in the eyes. The same dark eyes with the same slight downward pull at the outer corners that I had looked at across the breakfast table for 18 years and across the terrible distance of absence for 4 more. My hand moved before I decided to move it. I reached out and put my palm against his face, this man kneeling on my porch step, this stranger who was not a stranger, and his eyes closed, and he turned his face into my hand the way he had turned his face into my shoulder the morning the black car came and took him. And I felt his jaw working against my palm as he tried to hold himself together and failed completely and did not care. "Ethan," I said. My voice came out in pieces broken up by everything behind it. "Ethan!" He stood. He was taller than I remembered, or I had forgotten how tall, or time had done something to the scale of things between us. He stood, and his eyes were wet, and his jaw was set in that way it had always been set when he was determined not to be beaten by a moment, and he turned to face the yard and every person in it. Outside the fence, Maggie Odom had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking with something that was not grief. Ethan looked at Gerald Poole. His voice when he found it was steady in a way that I recognized as costing him something. "Mr. Poole," he said, "my name is Ethan Hayes. I am the acting chairman of Whitmore Innovation Group, and I need you to look at something before anyone in this yard takes another step." Diane Colton came up behind him and opened the file case, and the morning light fell across 40 pages of documentation that were about to take Brandon Hayes' carefully constructed plan apart 1 paragraph at a time. Ethan did not raise his voice once in the 2 hours that followed. I noticed that. I noticed it because I was sitting on the porch step beside him the whole time, close enough to feel the steadiness coming off him, like heat, and I understood that this particular kind of quiet was not the quiet of a man holding back. It was the quiet of a man who has already decided completely and without reservation and has nothing left to prove to anyone in the yard. He sat beside me on the step and let Diane work. She set up her laptop on the porch railing and connected to the Los Angeles Superior Court's public records portal, which is accessible to any member of the public with a case number and a browser. And she began going through the conservatorship file that Brandon had spent 4 months constructing, page by page in the calm and methodical way of someone who has found exactly what she expected to find and is simply confirming the dimensions of it. Gerald Poole stood 5 feet away. He had stopped looking at his own documents and was watching Diane's screen with the expression of a man who is beginning to understand the specific shape of the problem he has walked into. "Psychiatric evaluation," Diane said without looking up. "Submitted by Dr. Kenneth Marsh, dated August 3rd. She pulled up the California Medical Board's license verification portal on a second window. It took 11 seconds. Dr. Marsh's license to practice psychiatry in California expired July 23rd. That is 11 days before the date on this evaluation." She looked up at Gerald Poole over her laptop. "The evaluation was backdated, Mr. Poole. On the date printed at the top of this document, Dr. Marsh was not legally permitted to produce it." Gerald Poole's face did something complicated. He looked at Brandon. Brandon was looking at the porch railing. "Durable power of attorney," Diane continued, "submitted as supporting documentation for the conservatorship petition." She produced a second document from her file case, a photocopy of Walter Hayes' signature card from his bank account obtained that morning with the cooperation of the branch manager on Foothill Boulevard, who had been uncomfortable about the restricted access order from the beginning and was very willing to provide records once an attorney with a legitimate legal basis requested them. The signature on the power of attorney does not match the signature on file at the bank, The letter formation is different. The pressure points are different. The overall slant is different. She laid both documents on the porch railing side by side. This is a forgery. One of the deputies had moved closer without appearing to move. He was standing at the base of the porch steps now, his arms at his sides, and he was reading the documents over Diane's shoulder with an expression that had shifted considerably from the professional neutrality he had arrived with. Brandon made a sound that was not quite a word. Evelyn had pressed herself into the corner of the porch, and her arms were crossed so tightly over her chest that her knuckles had gone white. Ethan stood up from the step beside me. He went into the kitchen and came back with Maggie's shoebox. He placed it on the porch railing between the laptop and the bank documents. He took the lid off. 23 letters, he said. His voice was quiet and even, and cost him something I could hear underneath the evenness. Written over 4 years, every one of them sent to this address, every one of them removed from the mailbox before my father could see them. He looked at Brandon for the first time since the helicopter had landed, a long and level look that had nothing in it that resembled anger, and everything in it that resembled the end of something. Under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15610.30, the deliberate isolation of a person 65 years of age or older from family contact, combined with financial exploitation, constitutes elder financial abuse with aggravating circumstances. Brandon opened his mouth, then he closed it. I am not a prosecutor, Ethan said. I am not here to argue with you. I am here because 40 minutes ago I was sitting in a conference room 40 miles from this house, and I read my father's address in a court document, and I got on a helicopter. He picked up one of the envelopes from the shoebox and held it up, not aggressively, simply clearly, so that everyone in the yard could see it. These letters are evidence of a pattern. My attorney has already filed an emergency motion with the Superior Court this morning, documenting the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation and the forged power of attorney. The motion was granted before this helicopter landed. He set the envelope down. Diane's phone rang. She looked at the screen, answered it in 2 words, listened for 15 seconds, and then lowered the phone. The temporary conservatorship order is suspended pending full evidentiary review, she said. We have confirmation from the court clerk. The yard went very still. Gerald Poole looked at the documents on the porch railing for a long moment. Then he straightened up and cleared his throat and turned to the deputy nearest the steps. A deputy, Yuma said, in the voice of a man making a decision that is going to cost him his retainer, but not his license. I need to advise my client to suspend all enforcement activities immediately pending legal review of the supporting documentation. He did not look at Brandon when he said it. I would also strongly recommend that your office contact the county district attorney. The senior deputy nodded slowly. He turned to the 3 deputies positioned around the yard and gave a single short nod, the kind of nod that means stand down without saying it out loud. The others relaxed their positions incrementally, the way trained people relax, not all at once, but enough that the room felt different. The pressure of all those uniformed bodies in a small kitchen, releasing like a valve turning. Brandon's hands came off the railing. He stepped back once, then again, the small retreating steps of a man trying to find a position that does not exist. His face had moved through several expressions in the past 10 minutes and had settled on something that was not guilt and was not defiance, but was somewhere between them, the expression of a man who has run out of prepared responses and is standing in the open for the first time. Evelyn had not moved from her corner of the porch. She was looking at the shoebox on the railing with the 23 envelopes visible inside it, and her face was doing nothing at all, which was worse than any expression it could have made. I was still sitting on the porch step. Ethan sat back down beside me. He did not say anything immediately, and I did not say anything, and this was not the silence that was forbidden between us, because it was not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have too much to say and are choosing for this one moment to simply sit beside each other and breathe the same air and let the morning do what it was going to do. His shoulder was against mine. The same shoulder it had always been against in the driveway after school, on the porch on summer evenings, at the kitchen table, on the morning I told him to go further than this place. I put my hand on his arm. He covered it with his. The law is a slow machine. It does not apologize for being slow. It does not explain itself or account for the days it takes to move or the weight it accumulates along the way. It simply moves, and when it finally moves in the right direction, it moves with the full mass of everything it has been holding, and the people standing in its path discover very quickly that there is no dignified way to be struck by it. The temporary conservatorship order was formally vacated by the Los Angeles Superior Court 4 days after that Monday morning. Diane filed the full evidentiary package that afternoon, the backdated psychiatric evaluation, the forged power of attorney with the signature comparison, the 23 letters establishing a documented pattern of deliberate isolation, and the Meridian Capital connection that had brought the whole structure to light in the first place. The judge reviewed the file and signed the revocation order before 5 o'clock. Brandon and Evelyn were served with a notice of criminal investigation the following Thursday. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office filed charges under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15610.30, Elder Financial Abuse, and California Penal Code, Section 470 Forgery. Gerald Poole, true to the decision he had made on the porch that Monday morning, provided a full account of his involvement to the investigating detectives and agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. It would cost him his relationship with Brandon and his retainer, but it would not cost him his license, which was the calculation he had made, and which I will not judge him for, because I have made my own calculations in my time, and not all of them were clean. Dr. Kenneth Marsh surrendered what remained of his license voluntarily and accepted a separate referral to the medical board's disciplinary committee. The notary in Arcadia, who had processed the forged power of attorney, was referred to the California Secretary of State's Office for License Review and cooperated fully with the investigation, providing records that confirmed the signature had been presented by Evelyn Hayes, without Walter Hayes, presenced a fact that added a further count to the charges already filed. Meridian Capital LLC was acquired by Whitmore Innovation Group on amended terms that included a clause drafted personally by Ethan and marked non-negotiable by Diane, requiring the immediate withdrawal of all pending conservatorship petitions filed under Meridian's facilitation. 4 families in Los Angeles County had their cases dismissed in the same week. I did not follow the legal proceedings closely after that. Ethan had people for that, and Diane was the best of them, and I had other things to attend to. The most important thing was the house. My bank account was unfrozen within 48 hours of the court order. I drove to the branch on Foothill Boulevard on a Wednesday morning and walked up to the same teller who had told me 2 months earlier that she was very sorry, but she was not able to override the restricted access. And she looked at her screen, and then she looked at me, and she said, "Mr. Hayes, your account has been fully restored. Is there anything I can help you with today?" I withdrew $200. The carburetor for the truck had been waiting long enough. Ethan stayed through the week. He slept in his old room in the bed that was too small for him now, with his feet hanging off the end, and he did not complain about this once. In the mornings, I heard him moving around in the kitchen before I was up making coffee the way I had taught him, 2 scoops, not 3 because 3 makes it bitter, and the sound of another person moving through this house at 6 in the morning was something I had not realized how much I had missed until I had it back. Pastor Linden came by on Wednesday afternoon and sat on the porch with us and drank his coffee without commenting on its quality, which was his highest form of praise. He looked at Ethan for a long time without saying anything, and then he said, "I prayed for this, specifically for this. I want you both to know that." Ethan looked at him. "How long?" "Since the night your father called me," Pastor Linden said. 22 years, give or take." Ethan's jaw worked for a moment. He nodded once, looking at the yard, and pressed his lips together, and I watched him absorb that, the way you absorb something that is both a gift and a weight at once. Maggie came over Thursday morning with tomato seeds in a brown paper envelope. She set them on the kitchen table without making a ceremony of it and said, "I thought the garden could use something to look forward to." Then she sat down and drank her coffee and talked about her sister in Fresno, and did not mention the shoebox or the letters or any of the things she had carried for 10 years, because Maggie understood that some things do not need to be discussed further once they have been resolved. They only need to be set down and left where they land. That evening, Ethan and I stood in front of his room together. The door was open. The bed was made. The books were on the shelf in the same order they had been in when he was 18, and had walked out the front door with a suitcase that was too light. "You kept it," he said. I had been looking at the room. I turned to look at him. "Every single day," I said. His throat moved. He looked back at the room, and then at the floor, and then back at the room, and he was doing the thing he had always done when something hit him harder than he had prepared for, looking for a fixed point to anchor himself to, while the feeling did what it needed to do. "I thought you had moved on," he said. When the letters stopped, when Brandon told me, he stopped, started again. I thought I was right. About being easy to leave behind. My chest ached with a specific and familiar pain. "Ethan," I said, "look at that room." He looked. "Does that look like a man who moved on?" He did not answer right away. He stood in the doorway of his childhood room, 22 years old, with everything he had built and everything he had lost and everything he had found again that morning, sitting inside him all at once, and his eyes went bright and wet, and he did not bother hiding it. "No," he said, "it does not." I put my hand on his shoulder. He put his hand over mine. We stood there in the hallway of the house on Sycamore Mill Road, father and son looking at the room that had waited, and the evening light came through the window at the end of the hall and fell across the floor in a long stripe of gold, and outside in the yard, the garden waited too patient and dark and ready. We started the garden on a Saturday morning in late October, 3 weeks after everything had settled. Maggie brought the tomato seeds she had left on the kitchen table, the same envelope brown paper, no label, the kind of envelope that means the seeds came from someone's own garden and not from a store. Pastor Linden brought his old planting gloves, the leather ones, with the cracked knuckles that he had owned since before I moved to Sycamore Mill Road. Ethan bought a new shovel from the hardware store in Clover Ridge because he said the old one had been leaning against the barn wall long enough to have earned its retirement, and he said it with the particular straightness of a man making a small joke, because the alternative is feeling too much all at once. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of October morning that California occasionally produces as an apology for summer, when the light comes in low and gold, and the air smells like damp soil and eucalyptus, and the particular sweetness of things that are ending well. We worked without much talk, the way people work when the work itself is the conversation. Ethan turned the soil with the new shovel, while Maggie and I broke up the clods with our hands, and Pastor Linden ran the hose along the far row, wetting the earth before the seeds went in. The ground had gone hard in the years I had left it, but it had not gone dead. Under the crust, it was still dark and rich, the kind of soil that remembers what it was made for and is ready to return to it the moment someone pays attention again. "You are doing that wrong," I told Ethan at one point, watching him plant. He looked up from the row. "I looked it up," he said. "Online, 3 sources. The internet does not know this soil," I said. "Plant them a hand's width deeper and lean them toward the south. The afternoon sun comes in at an angle here from October on." He looked at me. Then he looked at the row. Then he pulled the seedling back out and replanted it the way I had said. And he did not comment further on the 3 sources, which told me more about how much he had grown up than anything else that morning. Maggie laughed from the end of the row. She had a laugh that started low and built the kind of laugh that makes other people laugh before they know what they are laughing about, and Pastor Linden joined it, and even Ethan's mouth pulled sideways into something that was not quite a smile, but was close enough to count. By midday the rows were in, and the seeds were down, and the hose had made its full circuit, and the 4 of us sat on the porch steps in the thin October sun, with whatever we had thought to bring for lunch, which turned out to be a partial overlap of Maggie's sandwiches, and Pastor Linden's thermos of coffee and a bag of chips Ethan had bought at the same hardware store as the shovel. After Maggie and Pastor Lyndon left that afternoon, Ethan and I sat on the porch in the quiet that they left behind. The yard had the particular piece of a place where work has just been done, and the results are not yet visible, but the potential is planted and real. I went inside and came back with the wooden box. I set it on the step between us and lifted the lid. Ethan looked at what was inside the flannel blanket gone soft with age that I had found him wrapped in. The yellow baby blanket, the folded note in a stranger's handwriting, "Please take care of my son," and the letter with the wrong handwriting, the one Brandon had written, and I had believed for 4 years. Ethan picked up the letter with the wrong handwriting. He read it. I watched his jaw tighten and release the physical work of processing something without letting it pull him under. Then he folded it carefully, set it back in the box, and did not say anything about Brandon or Evelyn, because there was nothing left to say about them that the week's events had not already said more clearly than any words could. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the piece of paper that had lived there for 4 years, folded in 4, worn soft. At the creases the penciled address, almost but not quite faded. He unfolded it slowly and laid it flat in his palm so I could see it. 14 Sycamore Mill Road, Clover Ridge, California, just in case. He placed it in the box beside the note that had started everything. 2 pieces of paper, 2 requests made across time by people trying to trust that the person on the other end would hold. "Please take care of my son," just in case. Both of them had been answered. I looked at the 2 pieces of paper lying side by side in the wooden box, and I felt something settle in my chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, because happiness is too light a word for something that has this much weight behind it. Something more like the feeling of a door that has been open in a draft for years, finally being properly closed. Not shut closed. There is a difference. One keeps things out. The other simply lets the room be warm. "I always knew you would come back," I said. Ethan turned to look at me. "How?" he asked. I looked at the box, at the flannel blanket and the yellow blanket and the note and the letter and the 2 pieces of paper lying side by side. "Because I never put it away," I said. He looked at the box for a long moment. Then he looked at me. His eyes were bright, and he was not going to cry, and I was not going to cry, either because we had both done enough of that in the past 3 weeks to last us a reasonable while, and because sometimes the right response to something true is not tears, but simply the acknowledgement of it, the quiet placement of it into the record of a life shared. He nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man filing something away in the place where the important things are kept. The afternoon light moved across the yard, long and gold, the way October light moves when it has all the time in the world. The new rows of turned earth ran straight and dark from the porch to the fence, waiting for what we had put into them to become what it was going to become. A tomato plant does not show itself for weeks after planting. You water it, and you wait, and you trust the ground to do what ground does when it is tended and given the right conditions. You do not dig it back up to check on it. You simply believe that what you planted is growing, even when you cannot see it, and you come back to it every morning, and eventually the evidence appears above the surface, and you discover that the believing was the whole of the work. I have thought about that a great deal since that October morning on the porch. I have thought about what it means to tend something across 22 years of silence and distance and loss, and the particular grief of not knowing whether what you are tending is still alive. I have thought about the wooden box I kept under the bed and never put away, and the piece of paper folded in 4 in a jacket pocket opened 10,000 times in hotel rooms and highway rest stops and quiet offices in the dark. I have come to believe that what keeps a promise alive across that kind of distance is not certainty. You cannot be certain across 22 years. You cannot know. You can only keep the box. You can only keep the paper in your pocket. You can only water the rose in the morning and trust the ground and come back the next day and do it again. And then one morning, the evidence appears above the surface, and you discover that the tending was worth it all along. Ethan stayed through the end of October. He drove back to Los Angeles on a Sunday. in the truck he had bought in Clover Ridge because he said the rental car felt wrong for Sycamore Mill Road, and he called when he arrived the way I had always asked him to call when he was somewhere safely, a habit he had apparently kept, even across the years when we were not speaking, which I chose not to examine too closely because some things are better accepted than understood. That evening I made my circuit of the house, checked the barn door latch, turned the bucket beside the pump, came inside and stood for a while in the kitchen, the way I had stood for 22 years, looking at the things that were still there. The wooden box was on the table where we had left it that afternoon. The 2 pieces of paper were inside it side by side. Beside the box, propped against the kitchen wall, where Ethan had set it before he drove away, was the new shovel, still clean, still carrying the store sticker on the handle that he had not bothered to remove. I looked at the shovel, and I looked at the box, and I looked at the dark window above the sink with the garden just barely visible behind it in the last of the evening light. And I thought about a flannel blanket in a plastic basket on a rainy porch, and a set of small fingers closing around one of mine, and a boy who grew up and went away and came back on the one morning when it mattered most. And I thought that Evelyn had been right 22 years ago in this same kitchen when she said that bringing that child inside would change everything. She had only been wrong about what kind of change it would be. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to my room, and for the first time in more years than I could accurately count, I did not lock the door behind me. The house settled around me in the dark, making its familiar sounds, the pipes and the rafters and the second porch step shifting in the cooling air. Outside, the garden waited in the October dark, patient and quiet and full of what we had put into it. And at the end of Sycamore Mill Road, where the pavement gives way to gravel and the gravel gives way to the memories of everything that has happened in one ordinary house over the course of one extraordinary life, the night came down gently, the way it does when a story has finally found its proper ending. I have told you this story as honestly as I know how. If there is one thing I want you to take from it, it is this. The people who stay, the ones who keep the box, who tend the rows, who check the mailbox before the coffee is made, God puts them in your path for a reason you will not understand until the morning you need them most. This is a family story about what it costs to choose love when walking away is easier. I did not always choose wisely. I trusted the wrong people too long and let silence do my speaking for me. If someone in your life has gone quiet, do not wait 22 years to find out why. Do not be like me. Every family betrayal I survived came from people I had given keys to. Every piece of grace came from people I almost overlooked. That is what I believe, and I am standing by it. This has been a family betrayal that became a homecoming. A family story worth every painful year. A family betrayal I would not trade because it brought my son back through the door. If this family story touched something in you, leave a comment and tell me what it was. Share it with someone who needs it today. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not what you were looking for, we respect that completely. Choose what speaks to you best.